Coming up next on Living on the Edge with Chip Ingram.
I want to show you the difference between discipline and punishment. If you don't get it, you will not discipline the right way. Punishment produces some negative things. Discipline produces very positive things.
Do you find yourself getting angry with your children? Do you find yourself trying to discipline them, but the volume is going higher and higher as you yell at your kids, or maybe worse? If there's one area that's difficult for a parent, it's how do we discipline our kids? We're going to talk today about the most controversial issue when it comes to child discipline, and that's the issue of spanking. Is it right? Is it wrong? How would you do it? But before spanking, there's an even bigger issue. Many people think that you need to punish your children. I'm going to go on record to say that God never wants you to punish your children. There's a night and day difference between punishment and discipline. The same action may appear the same, but I will tell you this, when you understand that difference, it changes your heart, it changes your attitude. This is going to be a very positive thing for many of you who have children that you say, I can't do anything with them. Stay with me.
Well, my parents get me to obey by, they buy me stuff, pretty much.
What kind of stuff do they buy you?
Toys, candy, stuff like that.
Yeah, and does it work?
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's more like you're training them than they're training you, right?
Yeah.
How long did it take to get your mom trained?
About a month.
When they say, now obey me, it always means, 3 more chances till I really need to. If I ask Mama for bubble gum or something like that, I beg if she says no, and if she still says no, I whine. I have a frown and I roll my eyes back in my head.
She goes, I'm gonna count to 5. If you don't get over here, you're gonna be grounded. 1. She counts really slow though. But I wait until about 2 seconds, and then I run.
What's the highest number you've ever let her count to?
9.
You never done 9.5?
133.
Do you ever fake cry and whine so your parents or beg? What does that look like? Do you ever whine?
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever whine?
Yeah, whine. I know, if I go like this, she'll give me what I want.
I just make this face.
I'm gonna give you a little tip. You say this, mommy, 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 mommy. Or say this, are we almost there yet? Are we almost there yet? Are we almost there yet? So you just hold your breath until she gives in. What's the longest that's ever taken?
15 weeks.
That sounds like some kind of world record, is it?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to turn to the next page, and I want to talk about the how-to. And when we were looking at this idea of punishment and discipline, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but in the NIV, where it says in Proverbs 3, and he punishes every son, I want you to know that that's a good translation, although in our current context, it is not a good translation. Because the idea of punishment has to do with repaying with vengeance what someone deserves, so they have to pay for what they did. And what I want you to understand is that word in the NIV literally means to forcefully correct, to scourge, literally, to take whatever drastic measure to get this person, whether it's spiritually, in our case with the Lord, or as a parent, to take a drastic measure to get people to obey. But I put a little chart on the top of this page before we get to the how-tos, because I want to show you the difference between discipline and punishment. And there's a huge theological issue I want you to capture. If you don't get it, you will not discipline the right way. You'll punish your kids. And punishment produces some negative things. Discipline produces very positive things. So let me just walk through the difference between punishment and discipline. The purpose of punishment is to inflict penalty for an offense. The purpose of discipline is to train for correction and maturity. The focus of punishment is past misdeeds. You did this, you did this, you did that. The focus of discipline is future correct acts. The attitude, most often in punishment, is hostility and frustration on the part of the parent. You did it, I'm mad, I told you about it, let's get it straight, you're going to pay. Now, we don't always use those words, but our veins popping, our voice escalating, and our body language towering over them gives them an idea that this is probably not an under-control parent who's trying to deter destruction, laying boundaries for my good. And right now, what am I going to do? Or my mom is screaming, and we all know what that means. The final result is what I really want you to get, is that when you punish your kids, it results in fear and guilt. And when you discipline your children, it results in security. Now, let me give you a theological little nugget that you need to really grasp. And then I want to, from here, look at those 2 Hebrew words we talked about as the basis for the how-to of discipline. The gospel, very simply, is that God became a man, came into the earth, lived a perfect life, died, rose again from the dead the 3rd day before over 500 witnesses. And when he died upon the cross, he paid for the sins of all men of all time. Okay? That's the gospel. And that all of us must understand, first, that we have a problem. We have sinned and violated a holy God, and that there is no way to the Father except through the Son, and we need to receive the gift of his work on the cross for our benefit. And that's called salvation. When we do that, the Spirit of God enters our life. We are born again, spiritually birthed, and the Spirit dwelling in us now begins to develop the life of Christ in us. There's some theological words that we don't talk a lot about, but one is called propitiation. And propitiation simply means that because God is holy, when there is sin, he has just wrath or anger. When Jesus was on the cross and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? God's just wrath for sin, for your sin and my sin and everyone's sin, God took all his just wrath and he placed it on Christ. So that he absorbed, he propitiated, he absorbed the just wrath of God in our place. So God's full and just punishment for all sin, for all time, was placed on Christ. So the gospel is not convincing people about Jesus. The gospel is letting people know, as they did in the New Testament, there's happy news. There's happy news. That's what the word, euangelion, good or happy news. You've been forgiven. The Son of God came. He paid for your sin. Would you like the free gift of salvation? Condition, turn from your wicked way and receive the gift of Christ. Now you say, what's that got to do with disciplining my kids? If Jesus took all the punishment and just wrath of God, he took it for you, he took it for me, and he took it for your kids. I don't want to teach my kids that they've been bad, they've been naughty, and I'm going to make them pay for what they did. I want them to understand the only way to make right what they did is for them to understand when Jesus died on the cross, he paid for it. And I want them to receive that and understand that. And because he paid for it, my role as a parent is not to punish them. Jesus took the punishment. My role is to help them see how that behavior is unpleasing to God, and that my role then is to help them in future acts cooperate with God's work in their life. Does that make sense? See, that means as a parent, are you ready? You can never discipline out of anger. Ever. You know what we say to our kids? Go to your room. When you are mad, now I'm not saying you can't get mad. My kids have done things that make me livid. It took me 10 minutes or a day to calm down. But what I know is why I'm livid and mad, I need to go to my room. And I need to get clothed and in my right mind and say, Dear Jesus, I just want to do something very ungodly and very unholy, and I want to scream and I want to express my anger and I want to make them pay. And wait a second. You already paid for them. Okay, thank you. Now, I want you to help me righteously deal with my anger, and then I'm going to let them know I'm really upset, but I'm going to make the focus of this interchange them getting right with you and corrective behavior for the future. And the reason I make such a big deal about this is that it really ties into one of the major ways that people discipline, and this whole issue of spanking. You know, when you watch a 20/20 or a 60 Minutes and they show people doing spanking, it's like these wild people, you know, clubbing kids. That's nuts. Here's the premise. I'm going to share a few fairly controversial things in our day. please just listen for the next 5 to 7 minutes. You know, just give me a hearing. And I'm going to give it from Scripture, then I'm going to support it, and then I'm going to talk very clearly about how to do something in terms of the actions, right? How do we discipline our kids? Actions and words. Yasar, yacheg. So then when I do that, then I want you to step back and say, okay, I have a background in educational psychology, you might say to yourself. I've read this, I've read that, I've watched things on TV. You make the decision for yourself whether this type of action is the healthiest way to help your child, okay? Let's look at the 2 Hebrew concepts. The first one is actions or consistent consequences, chastisement with the rod. Proverbs 13:24. This is pretty clear. He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Let me read that again. This is in the Bible, okay? Well, I want to say that because we can't I like verse 14, but I don't like verse 18. This is in the Bible. He who spares the rod hates his son. Doesn't dislike him, hates his son. But he who loves him disciplines him diligently. Or Proverbs 22:15. Folly, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far from him. I would like to suggest that there are, in fact, times to spank your kids. I'd like to suggest that you don't need to do it very often. But I'd like to suggest that God has made little children, once they get old enough, with some extra adipose tissue in an area on their body where it does absolutely no damage. That's a big word for fat, okay? And I would suggest that a lot of us as parents, especially, and I'm talking about kids when they're small, and I'm speaking of only rare instances. I don't mean picking this and that. I mean when your kid steps out and says, I want to take you on. No, I won't do it. Or you have talked about something, for example, you know what? These kids you don't want them to hang out with. And you don't want them to go in the house because you know things that happen and the parents aren't there, and you say to your child, do not hang out with those 3 kids. They're 4 doors down. And do not go in their house. Their parents aren't there. And, alcohol's available and drugs are available and, they'll go at a bad... Do not do that. Do you understand? And then you drive by. It's God ordains parents like this. I have no idea how it works. But as you drive by, they're coming out the door. Right? And then you warn them and say, if you ever do that again, here's the time. Now you say, they're 9 years old. If that happens again, I'm going to discipline you. Do you understand exactly what that means? Yeah, I do. Well, 3 days later, same thing happens. Those are times, willful, rebellious attitudes of lying, of stealing, of talking back. When they basically say, there's a line in the sand, and remember they're asking, where's the boundaries? And what they do is they go like this over across that boundary, and they say, is there a real man or a real woman in the house? I don't think so. And they can do that when they're 2 like this, or they can do it when they're 14 like this. And you know something? You better win that battle. And if you don't, you'll be going downhill ever since. And I like to suggest from at least some psychological background that it is far less damaging when I talk about how to do it and the way to do it. It's far less damaging to have a brief, under control encounter with a child who's done something he knows is wrong, where they are spanked, loved, prayed with, restored, and their conscience is clean, is a lot more psychologically less damaging than yelling and screaming and how many times and why did you do that and what's wrong with you and go to your room. And a kid goes to his room, there's no resolution, his conscience is never cleared, and it ends up with one little boy or one little girl mad at his mom and dad here and a parent who never makes any resolution. And so why are we surprised when it happens again? There's never closure. So with that, let me suggest that there is a way that you can spank your children. Now, I'm assuming that, there's a lot of common sense in the room, and that at very, very tiny early ages that, you're going to use your... And I'm going to tell you that you never lay your hand on a child, ever. In our home, we had a little wooden spoon. I want my kids, when I held up the wooden spoon, to know, oh, I don't want the wooden spoon, okay? But I'm never, the hand that loves, caresses, prays, and holds them should never be the thing that touches or hurts them. And the other is, you never lay a hand on a kid ever. I Man, you never slap a kid. You never hit it. You never, if you do that, go get help. Here's what I'm talking about. Biblical discipline. Remember, it's discipline. I'm not angry. I'm under control by the grace of God. And so let me give you 7 steps to discipline when you have to use actions. First is it should always come with a clear warning. A kid should never be grabbed on the arm and be, no. They ought to know, when I do this, this happens. Very few things are we going to discipline, but when this happens, it's going to happen. Clear warning. Second is establish responsibility. And by the way, this is mostly in those early years where what you're doing is you're laying down the railroad tracks. I rarely had to spank my kids. Now, I had a couple that we spent a little more energy in the early years because they just couldn't quite get it. But it also helped the younger kids realize, I don't think I want to go that route. But what you don't want to do is say, okay, why did you do that? How many times have I told you? I said, don't go in that house. It's the 3rd time this week. You went in that house again. Why did you do that? That is a stupid question. That is a theologically stupid question. So why do you sin? I mean, what do you want your kid to say? 7, 8-year-olds, I'm sorry, Mommy and Daddy. I know I'm born in Adam, and according to Psalm 51, it's in my innermost being, and the flesh wages war against the spirit, and I think I gave into the flesh, and you know, it's a fallen world system. Don't ask your kid why. You know why. What you want him to do is own responsibility. You're calm, you're under control, and then you sit down and you say, what? Not why. What did you do wrong? I didn't do anything wrong. Everyone was there, and I was only in there for a minute with stuff. What did you do wrong? I only went into... Son, let me give you one more chance here. What did you do wrong? I went in with Jeremy and Johnny in the house. What did I tell you? You said I wasn't allowed. I couldn't under any circumstances. So what did you do wrong? I disobeyed you. Got it? See, I'm not trying to punish him. I'm trying to help him learn. People never learn unless they own their responsibility. And the goal, by the way, the reason, if they're disciplined well, it takes time. So you warn them, they own their responsibility, and then you always avoid embarrassment. You don't do it in front of the other kids. You don't yank them out of a booth in a restaurant and start this kind of stuff that I've seen parents. You don't yell and scream at your kids. That's damage. So in our house, it was either our bedroom or their bedroom. Quiet, just the 2 of us. And then you communicate grief. I want my children to know that instead of anger, that's a punishment response. They get that. I'm very disappointed. And then I want them to feel early on, I trust you. I love you. I mean, don't we let you go lots of places? Haven't we done this? I care about... You violated my trust. And authentically, if it happens, if they see some tears flowing down your face, when you know that they have broken your heart, that's what discipline's about. When you disobey God, when I disobey God, He doesn't rage His fist and say, Ingram, boy, that guy's making me crazy down there. It breaks His heart. All the punishment that I deserve, He already placed on Christ. Your kids need to see that their lack of obedience, it breaks your heart because you love them and you want what's best. And then after you communicate grief, this is sort of a very, very practical aspect. But never reach back and swing at your kids or hurt them. You know, I always had them kind of get right on the bed and lean over, and the key is a flick of the wrist. The goal is a sting. You don't want to do any damage whatsoever. But with just a wooden spoon, you flick your wrist like that, boom, boom. I'll tell you what, you want it to sting and hurt a lot, do absolutely no damage, and it ought to produce, okay? If it produces... then however many they got, they need one more, okay? Or, and you know, I watch some mothers, I won't say any in the audience that I know well, but, you know, like, okay, I know this is important. If it doesn't hurt, it doesn't work. That is not loving. Now, there is a time, too, by the way, especially ladies. You know, they get bigger and bigger, and it's 12 and 13, it's less and less and less, and you rarely ever have to do it then, but sometimes there's a biggie when you need to. My wife knew it was time to stop spanking one of our sons when she did the deal, and he just looked at her and started laughing. That means they're too old to spank, okay? But do you see, it's under control. The goal is discipline. You're not angry. They understand what they've done wrong. They bend over and then, Okay? And they get it, and especially when they're really small. And when they start hitting preteens, you're probably just about done if you've done it well early on. Now and then you still have to. And then what I found is after that, I really wanted to make sure that my kids got a chance to repent. And so when they were real small, I just let them sit in my lap, and they were crying. I just let them cry for a little bit. And then after they cried for a little bit, then I would say, are you ready to talk today? You ready to talk to God? Because I taught them little by little. Are you ready to talk to God? Yeah, I'm ready. Okay, why don't we talk to God together? Okay, what do you want to say to God? God, I'm sorry. Okay, what do you got to coach him. What are you sorry about? I'm sorry, I'm bad. No, that's not, you're not bad. You're very special. What are you sorry about? What did you do? I went in with Jeremy and Johnny in the house. Okay, tell God that. God, I'm sorry. Okay, what are you sorry about? I'm sorry, I disobeyed Dad and Mom and went into the house and I wasn't supposed to. Okay, what do you need to ask? Ask him to forgive you. Will you forgive me? And then he's in your arms, or she's in your arms, and you say, dear God, thank you for this precious little boy. Thank you for this little girl who's mine. How wonderful you made her. Thank you that she learned something today, and help her to remember. Give her strength to remember, to do what she knows is right. And thank you today, the moment she owned up to her, I don't usually use the word sin, but what she did wrong, that like a big eraser, you wiped it all off the board, and she's absolutely clean before you. And then after we get done praying, then I just put my arms around and hug them, and usually try and do something fun. Because number 7 is unconditional love. And here's what I want to tell you. The most intimate, deep times probably I've had with any of my kids have been after a time of disciplining. This is not a crude, big person with a big club who's angry getting kids by corporal punishment. This is using the rod God's way to bring about actions that will deter destruction. I got an email from a lady, I taught this in our church. She said, recently I've shied away from spanking, even though all my other discipline measures with our 7-year-old are not working. That tells you that maybe that's a good thing to try. She says, I've been exhausted by the confrontation and the drama that's often associated with disciplining, but your message was the kick in the pants that I need to do what's right before God and to be more loving to my son. Thank you. This morning during school, during our time of school, his attitude really stunk. He was argumentative, disobedient. He was clearly challenging my authority. And then he began to pick on his little brother. Well, we did what you said. We went upstairs, went through the process. 2 quick stings later, he was sobbing and repenting in my arms and apologizing. I held him, and then he said, Mama, I'm sure glad they made wooden spoons. We prayed, and he snuggled back into my arms. The rest of our day has been peaceful and without the arguments and disobedience we've been experiencing recently. Thank you for the reminder I needed to return to the courage to discipline. It doesn't sound like an out-of-control parent, does it? Unless you think we're using only anecdotal evidence, this is in the Santa Cruz paper, one of the most liberal communities in all of America. And it's a study done, it says, study, childhood spanking leaves no permanent scars. Occasional mild spanking of young children are okay, and they will not create any lasting harm that is carried into adolescence, according to a study released Friday. Such discipline does not hurt youngsters' social or emotional development, the researchers reported. The study was being presented at a meeting in San Francisco of the American Psychological Association. Okay? A lot of us have bought into a bad model of spanking and assumed, because we've never heard how to do it right, that we don't do it at all. And we have ongoing conflict. Some of your kids need you to lovingly draw some boundaries and then let them cross them. And if you're consistent for a couple weeks, you'll just find they'll have a little clean conscience. They'll know where they're at. They'll feel a lot more loved. And you don't have to live with all that conflict. Does it make sense?